If you've been scrolling through endless rows of 75-inch TVs, watching the same comparison videos, and still feel like you're stuck in a loop of bigger is better versus budget-friendly, this review is going to give you a clear picture of where the Hisense U8 series really lands. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've spent a good chunk of the last week setting this model up in a bright family room, testing a couple of game consoles, and binge-watching a handful of HDR movies, so what follows is based on actual daily use rather than a glossy spec sheet. First off, the biggest question most people have is whether a mini LED like this can actually compete with the OLEDs that dominate the premium segment. The answer is nuanced. The Hisense U8 pushes a 75-inch panel that can hit up to 5,000 nits at peak, which means it can easily handle a sunlit living room without washing out colors. That's a real advantage if you've got large windows or a TV that doubles as a daytime TV for sports and news. In my own setup, the picture stayed punchy even when the sun was right behind the sofa, and the colors stayed vivid thanks to the Pantone validated QLED matrix. For anyone who wants a TV that looks great both day and night, the brightness alone makes it a strong contender. On the gaming side, the native 165Hz refresh rate paired with a game booster that pushes VRR up to 288Hz felt surprisingly smooth on both a PlayStation 5 and a high-end PC. I ran a 4K 120 frames per second demo, and there was no noticeable input lag well under the 15 millisecond threshold that competitive gamers usually look for. The enhanced game bar overlay gave me quick access to performance stats without pausing the action, which is a nice practical touch for people who switch between gaming and streaming throughout the evening. But the high brightness and the 5/600 zone local dimming aren't a free lunch. While the mini LED backlight does a respectable job at creating contrast, it still can't match the pixel-level black that OLEDs deliver. In very dark scenes, think a moonlit horror movie or a shadowy indie film, there was a slight halo around bright objects, a phenomenon often called blooming. It isn't a deal-breaker for most viewers, especially if you're not sitting in a completely dark room, but it's something to keep in mind if you're chasing absolute black levels. Another practical aspect is the anti-reflection coating. The TV markets an anti-reflection pro layer, and in my tests it reduced glare enough to keep the picture readable on a sunny afternoon. However, if your viewing angle is extreme, say you're watching from a side couch, the reflected light can still become a distraction. So the TV is best suited for a fairly central seating arrangement, which is typical for a dedicated media room but might be a limitation in a more open-plan space. Now let's talk about everyday usability. The Hisense runs Google TV as its smart platform, and that means you get built-in voice search, a fairly robust app library, and the ability to cast from Android devices without a separate dongle. Setting up the Wi-Fi, linking your accounts, and navigating between Netflix, Disney Plus, and YouTube felt snappy. The interface didn't lag like some budget smart TVs do. The downside? The remote is a bit thin, and the backlit buttons can be hard to locate in a dark room. If you're used to a more tactile remote, you might end up reaching for a universal one eventually. Sound is another area where the U8 tries to punch above its weight. It ships with a 4.1.2-channel Dolby Atmos setup, which, in a typical living room, delivers a decent sense of height and directionality without needing a separate soundbar. I placed the TV on a low console and watched an action movie. The explosions and overhead cues were noticeable, though they still lacked the depth you'd get from a dedicated speaker system. If you're a casual viewer who doesn't want to invest in an extra audio setup right away, the built-in audio is a pleasant surprise. Audiophiles, however, will probably still want a separate sound solution. So who should actually consider buying this Hisense 75-inch U8? If you have a bright, moderately sized family room, enjoy both cinema-style movie nights and high framerate gaming, and want a TV that can double as a daytime display without sacrificing HDR performance, this model hits a sweet spot. The value comes not just from the headline numbers 5000 nits, 165 Hz, Dolby Vision IQ, but from the way those specs translate into day-to-day viewing. Vivid colors in sunlight, smooth motion for sports and games, and a smart platform that's ready out of the box. It also undercuts many OLED options by a significant margin, making it attractive for shoppers who want a premium feel without the premium price tag. On the other hand, if